One more time. Good evening, all. Thank you all so much for coming. Here are all of those of us who are really passionate about profession. And sorry that you will hear the dinging for a little bit. We just wanted to make sure.
It's a meeting.
Then just create a new directory.
Guys, let's mute all mics now.
Yes, please mute all mics. So one more time. Thank you all for being present, and you can hear some of the dinging. This is people checking in. And those of you who are just joining us, just please make sure that your mics are muted. With household keeping activities, we really specifically wanted to make sure that we conducted as a meeting for you could speak. At the beginning, I will have a couple minutes of introducing the general happenings in the United States and internationally, which prompts us to revision our law. And after that, David Beebe, our legislative committee chair, will update us specifically what is happening in Florida and what is happening on the floor with the bill. It will be a really short, brief just introduction. And after that, we really want to hear you and everything what you have to say and all of the questions which you have to ask. How that will be happening, because it's a lot of us. We have about 200 people registered for this town hall. Please enter your name in the chat box, okay? Ellen will be calling people in line who have their name in the chat box, and she will be unmuting your microphone. We just want to make sure that you are heard and it's not like all of us are talking simultaneously. So please enter your name in the chat box if you desire to speak. Alrighty, we are starting. It's our town hall meeting to discuss Florida 457 updates planned for years 2024 and possible stretch to 2025. Why we need to revision? First of all, it has been about 25 years since we revisioned our statutes last time. Next thing, what is happening internationally? Because traditional Chinese medicine is getting recognized on international level with release of ICD-11 chapter 26. It's first time ever then traditional Chinese medicine diagnostic codes become recognized. What that means, we are really becoming responsible diagnosing providers with our own set of codes. What that means in terms of acceptance. It's definitely going to be much quicker than ICD-10 were accepted by United States. I have participated in a couple meetings of United States CDC. They already working on establishing guidelines, and it's probably definitely going to happen within next max 5 years. So that increases our level of responsibility and increases standards of care for us. What that means, we must be reimbursed for evaluation and management code. Current Florida statutes do not have evaluation and management codes. So insurance companies increasingly refusing to pay those for us. And as a diagnosing provider, according to upcoming changes, we have to have that in our scope of practice. The next national trend in many, especially Republican states, there is a trend on reducing the licensing requirements for lower grade technical level professions. Like, for example, it's happened in Ohio. Without notifying Oriental Medicine Association of Ohio or without notifying Medical Board of Ohio, legislators just passed the law which eliminated Oriental medicine license and ability to practice traditional Chinese herbal medicine, affecting that license. So unfortunately, that trend is there. Also, the dangers to physician title is not unique to Florida. We have the similar trends to other states, like similar law have been passed in California and so forth. So it's why we have very many reasons why we need to revision. About details, David, can you please let us know what exactly is happening in Florida? Thank you.
David, you're still muted.
It's my first time doing this. Thank you, guys. I just wanted to echo Galina's welcome to the group and say that we're grateful for everybody's participation. And I keep my remarks to about 10 minutes with the discussion about changes for updating Chapter 457 and some of the rationale that goes along with that. And then, we'll use the balance of our time to make sure if there's questions that we have an opportunity to answer them. I wanted to start before I come to the next screen by saying, Galina commented that it's been since 1999 since the Practice Act was last updated, and how acupuncture is practiced in Florida has certainly evolved quite a bit since 1999 to include a handful of things we'll discuss in a second. But the major reason why we're having this discussion now about why in 2023 and 2024 is it the right time to be looking at doing this type of extensive effort and this type of work. And I want to start by saying that any legislative updates, whether it's our Practice Act or somebody else's, the legislature is only going to tolerate the looking at new language for Practice Act is that if it addresses and solves a specific problem. Practices are not necessarily just welcome to open their Practice Act and ask for rewriting legislative language, providing new definitions, making changes just because it's something that that they feel like the profession needs or wants. It really has to address a specific problem. And so one of the challenges for us in setting out and looking at the changes that we're contemplating here and the various concepts that are going to be introduced, all of them are very specifically designed to address, as I said a second ago, a specific gap or problem or change that can only be satisfied with updating the statute. And we're going to start with the first and obvious thing that was part of this discussion was since 2014, there's been a movement based on changes of federal law to eliminate the word Oriental from state and federal statutory language. And that Oriental was a term that, along with maybe a dozen or so other terms, that were replaced with a new updated language that was more appropriate for federal standards and for state standards. So this is something that if you look around the country, different state associations, different degree programs, credentialing bodies, have all sort of entertained various ways that they can replace the word Oriental with whether it's Asian American, Eastern, Far Eastern. There's a variety of things that have satisfied that requirement. And so that was sort of percolating in the background before we had a challenge from the Senate bill that was introduced last year and the companion bill that restricted use of titles to eliminate the term physician if used alone, in combination, or in connection with any other language to form a professional title. And the remedy for that was that, for professions who had that language or those titles included in their Practice Act, they were exempt from enforcement under the proposed bill last year. Now, ultimately, the profession did an admirable and heroic job of reaching out to committee members, committee chair people in the governor's office, and the governor, for a number of reasons, was persuaded to veto the title restriction bill that had passed in this. It was adopted in the Senate, it was adopted in the House, it survived a full vote in both chambers, and the governor decided that this wasn't right for Florida. Well, part of that discussion with leadership in the legislature included that if we wanted to preserve a professional title, it was going to have to be erected and defined in our Practice Act 457. And so if we're looking at making changes for Oriental, we're making changes for including proper titling for the profession, it made sense for FSOMA in the legislative committee to meet for the better part of a year, while everything else that was going on last year, to do an nationwide analysis of practice acts throughout the country for acupuncture to determine if Florida was ahead, behind, keeping pace with professions in other states. And we did identify a couple of gaps where new terminology and definitions would be appropriate for our Practice Act. And so what I want to do is share my next screen with you. And what I wanted to highlight here is a couple of the things on the left here. The last revision for 457 was in 1999. And it's served the profession well. It's been an effective scope of practice act for the profession, as well as protecting the public. And everybody's been able to work pretty well within the contours of that scope of practice. But on the left here, there are some challenges. The language that exists in current statute provides no authority and no protection for the professional title acupuncture physician. It provides no authority or protection for any professional title that includes doctor of, whether it's doctor of acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine, doctor of acupuncture and oriental medicine. There is no protection or definition for a professional title in our Practice Act other than the single word acupuncturist. So from the Department of Health standpoint, from the MQA standpoint, from a legislative standpoint, the only title that we have authority and protection for is acupuncturist, irrespective of your degree, irrespective of your years of practice, irrespective of what you might otherwise think. This is the only permitted defined term. The Board of Acupuncture has created, under the advertising rule, some additional language, but that's under the advertising rule and it's not defined in statute. And so what it means is we don't have authority or protection for anything other than what I just described. And at any point in time, the legislature can choose to, use restrictive language around the professional titles. So we're taking the opportunity to provide examples of professional titles in the updated version for Chapter 457, and then it'll be defined and protected. Under the scope of practice in the existing language, two things. One is the scope of practice is not defined. There is no scope of practice for acupuncture in Chapter 457. There's only a definition for what is acupuncture, but not what is the scope of practice, which is unusual because if you will look at any other regulated healthcare profession, each and every one of those professions has not only a definition, but also a definition for the scope of their practice. So we're making some steps to include language for scope of practice, but more importantly, as Galina alluded to, we have to include under the scope of practice patient evaluation and management. One, because it's practical and it's a necessary component of everyday practice, and we do evaluate and manage patients, but more specifically, as it applies to insurance reimbursement, if that language is not present in your scope of practice, then increasingly we're seeing companies not reimbursing for E&M codes when billed. And so, unfortunately, without having that specific language in our Practice Act, there's a lot of time spent with patients that, unfortunately, we cannot bill for. Also, under the scope of practice, there is no language that provides in-office clinical supervision for licensed acupuncturists to supervise other clinical support on their team. In other words, if you have somebody providing manual therapy, we're not allowed to provide direct supervision for them for billing purposes, certainly, but also for treatment purposes. Under the scope of practice, there is no definition for acupuncture injection therapies. This is a common practice in Florida. It's created through the adjunctive therapies rule interpretation by the Board of Acupuncture. We're all familiar with that language. But again, this is an area of scope of practice that is not, there is no authority to provide that care, and there is no protection to keep that from being removed from our scope of practice. If at some point in time in the future, there's an effort to do that. Everybody's familiar with diagnostic imaging and laboratory testing. Again, the Board of Acupuncture some time ago created language for diagnostic imaging, and laboratory testing is something that could be used by licensed acupuncturists in the treatment of patients, but there's no authority or definition or protection for licensed acupuncturists to prescribe and order diagnostic imaging, nor is there any prescriptive authority for laboratory testing. Under the existing language in 457, there is no prescriptive authority for sterile soluble injections. I'm sorry, sterile solutions that are injectables. If you look at the prescriptive rights under our existing language, they are limited to needles and devices only that are used in the practice of acupuncture. And so one of the challenges that the profession has had over time is access to injectables from the various either compounding or other pharmacies that provide those products. And one of the reasons why we have that challenge is because the existing statute lacks prescriptive authority for licensees under our chapter to order, prescribe, possess, administer these products. We also don't have prescriptive authority for MRI, C-scan, X-ray, ultrasound. People that, licensees that use imaging in their practice or, assist patients with, referring them to a radiologist for these services. Sometimes you have cooperation from a radiology or outpatient radiology business, and sometimes we don't. The reason why we don't is because we don't have prescriptive authority to prepare requisitions for patients to visit outpatient services for these things. It's not to say that we can't, other providers don't cooperate with us, but without authority and protection to do those things, these are areas of practice that are vulnerable to being restricted or lost or taken away. And I would extend the same to discussion about, use of laboratory testing for blood, urine, saliva, and stool samples. This can be helpful, again, in helping with diagnosing or referring patients, and each of those requires some prescriptive authority. And there are various workarounds, and we are able to do that. But I think, at this point, we're looking at providing clear scope of practice with authority for us to act within the training, knowledge, skills, and abilities that we gain during entry-level training. And so the existing language under 457 provides no authority or protection for any of the things I just described. And so we have options in new language in the updates that are being shared for 2024 to create authority and protection for the things that I just mentioned. That would be acupuncture physician title, the scope of practice, things for evaluation and management, providing direct supervision, prescribing and administering injections, prescribing and ordering imaging and labs. These areas of scope, typically, if you look, there's no other example in Florida for an autonomous provider. There's no other example of somebody who's not under supervision to provide those services. Typically, you're going to have a medical director or somebody in charge of an office who's providing evaluation and management, providing direct supervision, providing injection therapies, providing imaging and labs. Our goal is that we want to maintain our autonomy. We want to be able to perform and provide these services to our patients without supervision. And the only way that we're going to be able to do that is to update the chapter to include authority and protections over these things. All right. Again, updating the prescriptive authority for AIT and imaging. And then the last thing I wanted to sort of touch on, because I think it's worth noting, we look at physicians and non-physicians in Florida. Physicians are defined very clearly as medical doctors, osteopaths, and I want to say podiatry comes under a physician title. Non-physicians are practitioners who can carry, for example, a chiropractic physician title, an optometric physician title. But categorically, these are non-physicians, and acupuncturists and acupuncture physicians fall into this category from a technical standpoint. And what we want to make sure that we're able to do moving forward is maintain our autonomy and provide services that are typically supervised. For example, I can't think of another example of somebody who performs injections in Florida that are unsupervised, that are not medical doctors or nurse practitioners. Now, there are a lot of people that provide injections. Nurses do, EMTs do, a lot of subspecialties that do this, but they're all under some supervision of a medical director at some point in that chain of care. Here, we want to maintain our autonomy. We are the responsible providers for our patients, and we want to make sure that the authorities that are, the areas of scope that have been created by the Board of Acupuncture are in alignment and protected in the scope of practice. And if we don't have specific language to update and do that, then we risk, at some point in the future, having them either taken away or folded up on us. And so one of the things that, from a rationale standpoint, for us to have continued unsupervised practice with use of professional titles that include physician and doctor, patient evaluation and management, injection therapies, diagnosing and labs, prescribing authority. Future licensees will likely have to complete an entry-level doctoral program. And this is effective in the mid-2030s. And FSOMA has been in discussion with all 6 of the schools and colleges in the state to look at how they can use their existing standards and accreditation for both their institution and programs to create some sort of a dual or completion program that terminates in a doctorate. This has nothing to do with changing any requirements for somebody who is presently licensed in Florida. It has nothing to do with your renewal for license. There's no requirement for additional education unless you choose to do that on your own. This would be a future standard for entry level in order to preserve all of the autonomy that we have in our Practice Act. Completing with a master's degree and and still providing autonomous evaluation and management for patients, providing autonomous direct supervision for staff and contractors, performing and providing and prescribing injection therapies, and doing the other things that I mentioned. Unfortunately, the standard of education and training is going to be expected to be at the doctorate level. Otherwise, if you have a master's or an associate's or some other type of degree, then the expectation in the healthcare profession would be that the individual who is doing that would be supervised. And we want to continue to enjoy the breadth and scope of practice that we have. We want to continue to do this under our own authority and autonomously. These are changes that need to be contemplated, but they won't affect licensees prior to the effective date, which again, the discussions that we're having now with the program directors and the school administrators puts that decision somewhere into the 2030s in order for everybody to be able to manage that in a reasonable way that's not too disruptive to their existing programs.
David, I think we need to
Yes.
Open it up for talking.
That's it.
We could. I want to say briefly that I'm going to go through the chat and call on people. If you don't want to talk, you don't have to now. This is a group of people who are passionate about the profession, all of us. And I ask that everyone be respectful and listen and be open-hearted. And Ellen, not be attacking. Okay.
Ellen, if I may answer to one of the questions or rather concerns which keeps popping up in the discussion.
Sure.
How threatening is opening a practice act?
I'll start with that.
Yeah.
Do you want me to start with that question first? Because I know I've...
Yes, yes. And I will answer to that. Give me just a second.
Okay, please.
So if you think that if we do nothing and sitting still and hiding as mice under the broom and nobody going to touch us, it's not correct. How you see last year showed for us, they can just eliminate the physician title without consulting us and without even remembering about us. They are entitled to do that. If we don't have a protection written in the law, anyone can step on that. Or even again, like mentioning in Ohio, was it really intended to harm us? No, it's just some of the PhDs did conducted a research and tried to help the technical professions by eliminating license as preclusion to practice. They just forgot we are not home inspectors. In order to practice medicine, we need to have a license. And in Ohio, we had just two-tiered license. There was acupuncture license and oriental medicine license. They started with eliminating oriental medicine license, which it means on practical level. It's removed the right to practice herbs. So Cleveland Clinic, there I worked in traditional Chinese herbal medicine clinic, which was first in the United States, it's closed the clinic. It took 3 years, numerous amount of money, numerous politicians to reintroduce herb scope of practice into acupuncture law. So if you think that not doing anything protects us, wrong. Thank you.
Right. And so the question about the threat to practice, if we make edits and updates to Chapter 457, I have worked extensively. I have grilled extensively our attorneys, our government relations staff, and worked with the sponsors for our bill. This is what's going to happen. And I know that there are people among us that have different experiences at different periods of their life with different boards of medicine in different states. But as a legislative chair, I've sat and watched in the last 10 years athletic trainers open and close their practice act, massage therapists open and close their practice act, physical therapists open and close their practice act, nursing open and close their practice act, over and over and over, and not one of them has had their hands slapped. And I've certainly, in the example of nursing, has done leaps and bounds with their access to practice, and they're in direct conflict with the biggest of the medical professions out there. The conversation that I've had with our attorneys, when I say ours, I mean FSOMA's attorneys, and with the government relations people, is twofold. One, we've met with representatives, the attorneys from the FMA already, on all of the prescribed language. Okay. The areas that we're talking about in terms of aligning the Practice Act to provide E&M protection, clinical supervision, injection therapies, diagnostic labs, prescriptive authority, all these areas are fine. The only area that's a little bit contentious with them is the area of use of the term physician with acupuncture physician. And largely because there are people in that organization who have been in place for a number of years, whose terms are expiring next fall, who have been working very hard on producing the legislative language that we saw last year over protection of titles. It's the only area so far that's gray. And that's not to say that something can't creep up on us. But from a defensive standpoint, in the event that the sponsors, whether it's in the House or the Senate, are approached with any proposed edits to the language that we put in draft, the legislative team and everybody else is going to take that under advisement, and then they're going to call our attorneys, our government relations people. Ultimately, they'll reach out to me and the rest of the board for FSOMA to say, we have input from another profession. They want to see a certain change, or they want to add or eliminate something. It's part of that process. We can accept it, we can deny it, but either way, it's going to go through the bill sponsor. And in the example of the House and in the House of, the Senate and in the House of Representatives, we have excellent, strong, seasoned bill sponsors who are not going to get hijacked along the process. And in the end, if, for example, we get to a committee chair or some other person who just says, look, we're not going to hear your bill unless we see certain changes, or we're not going to hear your bill, period, then we'll be made aware of that. And if there's anything that would otherwise be considered like hostile, where somebody is going to insert language into the bill, they can't just take and run with that. We have the option of just withdrawing the language. And like I said, I've been over and over and over this with our own team to safeguard against anything that might be perceived as like a runaway train. All right. Now, that's not to say we're not going to get input that we don't expect. Something may come up, but it is our bill. When I say ours, it's the profession's bill. It's sponsored by somebody who's friendly to our ambitions in terms of updating the statute. And if it feels like, or it looks like, it's being manipulated in a way that's not to the advantage of the profession, or it takes a step back, or is harmful in some way, then the way that it's dealt with is by withdrawing the bill. And if we have to withdraw the bill, then, and we can identify where we're getting this, input, negative input, then we have a starting point for trying to address that with them. And in the end, if it just turns out that it's stagnant and there's some, force out there that's just not going to let us proceed, well, that presents a number of challenges to the profession. And it also puts us on notice that these areas of scope of practice that are not protected, okay, then they are vulnerable. And they're vulnerable now, and they're vulnerable until we otherwise get authority and protection for them. I hope that helps. It's a serious question, and I wanted everyone to know that there's no more serious concern for us, in trying to run a bill, is to make sure that it comes out much the way we want it going in. Okay, we don't have, unforeseen changes.
I'm going to let go out of order a little bit. Greta wanted to address this topic, I think. So, Greta, I'm asking you to unmute. There you go.
I'm unmuted. Yes, that was my question. And I don't think that, well, first of all, let me just say, I applaud the action and I applaud the intention. This is something that's been coming. This is something that will have to happen. Everything on your list that you're addressing, I applaud. My concern is great, however, and that is that we're going at it as a state and not as a national effort. That if you look back in history, and David talked about some of the practice acts that have been opened and closed. Recently, they've been open and closed, but if you look back at the first time this happened, it came forward from states. And for instance, nurse practitioners, that those were statewide efforts to change their practice act. And the AMA considered them what they call a scope creep. And they have unlimited budget and unlimited persons. And I really am glad that David said that he's been over and over it, and that he doesn't believe that we will be hijacked. I think that's my biggest concern there. What I've seen in the past with efforts like this in the Practice Act is that having a national effort, having a national coalition is where all of those practitioners had to rely on. They couldn't do it as a state, but when they came together as a national effort, it worked much better. So now you are seeing nurses open and shut practice acts, yes. But in the past, I was in one of those states where my practice suddenly changed because the state was just not capable of handling the amount of budget and people that overran us. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there. I know you've heard me and I've heard you.
No, I've been grateful. Grateful, Greta. You provided me with more than a little food for thought, and it made me do just what I was describing a few minutes ago. I had that in hand, and I had examples that you provided me of where, the challenges just swamped the canoe, and the effort was, destroyed, and so I use that as an example to say, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I need to understand. This is what I need you to understand in terms of the people that are carrying the ball for us, both the legal team and the government relations team. And so I think, the advantages to state compact are really what sort of moved nursing along. And you're right, whether it's regional or national. And unfortunately, we don't have a compact for our profession, and we don't have a strong central leadership role and I'm not knocking the ASA, but the things that they do fine, but they're not working on these types of challenges. And so as best I can, we're going to go, gently, softly, with eyes wide open and my head on a swivel. Okay. I promise.
All right, David, I've got to cut you off. Thank you, Greta.
Thank you.
Stuart, you were top of the list. Did you have something to say, or do you want to pass on it?
No, only two of the issues that I had some concerns about. One was probably the authority for nutrition, which is kind of always a hidden gem that we take for granted, that we can provide nutritional consultation and nutritional advice. And then that gets into, ordering nutritional supplements and the dispensing of those products. So that would be an area. I don't know if that's included in any of this scope practice, but I imagine anything that our current board of acupuncture has allowed us to do would probably be transferred over. So I want to make that comment.
Thank you, Stu.
The other one was about prescriptive privileges in pharmacy. So I get asked a lot, why can't I order this sterile injection bottle and it's just got saline in it? It's actually not the product, it's not the saline, it's the packaging at which it comes in that makes it a prescriptive product. And the pharmacist is just going to be able to dispense products that are legend drugs. That's called a legend that appears on that bottle. I think that might have to really be carefully crafted with prescriptive privileges. I know when I was in school, I had approached the dean and I told him, you know, did you see this AIT coming down the road? He goes, oh, we know all about it. That was the AMA, the osteopathic profession. They've seen it. They know about it. He goes, we don't care. They can inject all they want, but they're not going to be able to have prescriptive privileges. So what are they going to inject? That was the comment at that point.
Right.
So the difficulty is when you open that Pandora's box and say, we want to have legend product, even though it's sterile saline or maybe some other relatively inert product, it opens the door for all legend products, the prescriptive authority. You've seen that with nurse practitioners where they have prescriptive privileges, but it's supervised on a formulary. So that may be something that we want to look at. I don't know how wide the formulary is going to be, but they're not just going to hand over legend drug prescriptive privileges for you without any kind of corral around what products you can order.
I agree. And Stuart, I'm so glad you brought that up because if it's okay, I'm just going to make a quick comment and then we'll go back to the questions. Here in prescriptive rights, the language is being modified a little bit to mean, you know, it's a layover to what already exists in 457. But the way that it reads is that it also includes diagnostic, laboratory test imaging, botanical and herbal medicines, nutritional substances, sterile solutions, and prescription devices used in the practice of acupuncture and Eastern medicine. And so the language that we're working on is that the NCCAOM for the last 12 months has had a advisory committee working on a best practices standards in an AIT formulary to create a national standard for acupuncture profession. And so what the discussion is when it comes to, you know, what meets the criteria or approval for injectables for licensed acupuncturists, it would be those products that are consistent with the use and practice of acupuncture and Eastern medicine that meet the NCCAOM National AIT Formulary Standards. They'll be published in the next, I'd say, 4 to 6 weeks. I know they've been working at a breakneck pace to wrap up all the details with that. But the presentation that we have for it, rather than publishing a full formulary in the statute, which would require opening the statute every time we wanted to add or take something off of that list, is that we convey the authority to the Board of Acupuncture to establish and amend the formulary based on the national standard. So in this example, we hope that there would be no, you know, they would look at what's the national standard based on the NCCAOM recommendation, and they adopt that as the standard in Florida. And this is how we create the prescriptive authority in statute, and we use the language that that the board is going to establish and update that formulary from time to time, or as needed. So we'll have a working body of formulary that comes from as part of a national standard that's used in the practice of acupuncture. Okay. And
so in just a little addition to the David's reiterating on Stuart question. Stuart mentioned word dispensing. We don't have word dispensing in our scope of practice. We can practice herbs, but it's not described what we can do with herbs. We can prescribe them. Can we compound and dispense them? It has not been in our scope of practice. So any pharmacist would answer for you. You don't have a dispensing right. You have to contract the the compounding certified pharmacy for dispensing herbs, if we want to be really technical. So this time we're going through the language really with big details and big comp. Thank you, David. Sorry, putting my
no, please.
Okay. Can we keep going? There are a bunch.
Yep. Yeah, please.
Okay. Dickie, did you have comments or questions? Unmute and then.
Yes, I believe that this is a gigantic wave that's been coming for a while. We are currently in the position with David, who has studied the wave and knows how to ride it. I think we'd best ride along with him on this, because there's not going to be a better time to take care of these issues, and they're obviously going to have to be addressed. And that's really what I have to say.
Thanks, Dickie. You know, the other thing I just want to add quickly to that is that, you know, the discussion in Tallahassee is that, you know, there's a fair amount of concern and empathy and willingness for legislators to look at this language with us, because they are all had a front seat to the huge effort that we had last year just over the question of titling, and they have a front row seat as well to understanding and knowing that we were told the remedy for this and other problems with you guys is to update your Practice Act. And so, you know, whether it's the drafting office, the legislative drafting office on the Senate or the House, whether it's the various chairs for health committees and other committees that are going to hear this, they are well primed to understand what the deficiencies of our Practice Act are and what the various remedies that we have to go forward with. So it's a combination of things. It's you know, you don't always have the right temperament and the right mood. And like I was said at the very beginning, there has to be a rationale. There has to be a reason, a problem that's being fixed and solved. They don't open and change legislative language, Florida law, just for the sake of it. They do it to fix a problem. So when you show up and you say, hey, we've got this problem, this problem, this problem, and you give them a concrete remedy and language that fits in that, and a rationale that all works together, they'll give you a pass. And so it is a good time for that, because the mood and the expectation is that we would not sit on our hands and not, you know, take the opportunity to make these updates after, you know, 25 years.
Okay. Thank you, David. Liliana Kempenu, you're on my list. If you unmute. Are you still here? I don't have a... We'll keep going. Demita, good evening. Demita Hartz. Any comments or questions?
Good evening. I'm Liliana Campiano. I'm sorry.
Oh, hey, Liliana. Yes.
No, I don't have any questions.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just a reminder for you guys. If you want to ask questions, please enter your name into the chat, and if you can briefly tell us what you want to ask about, it would be really nice. But otherwise, that's the way for us to know that you want to ask something, your name in the chat box.
Demita?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I did want to ask, where are we with the fundraising efforts for opening the bill?
Right now, the fundraising effort is, well, we've our goals for our contributions for legislative support, that window closed on January 9th, and we were able to raise sufficient money to provide support for both sponsors for our bills, as well as key legislators who are in other legislative roles that can be helpful to the sponsors and helpful in committee. And so I think that, you know, there's always room for more, in so much as this is a 23, 24, 25, 26, it'll be a multi-year effort if some or all of this does not get it adopted in the first year. And so we'll be back, you know, working on this again. But I think we initially set out to raise 125, and I think we're probably over 50,000 now. But again, that was not for a single year spending, that was for a multi-year effort. Thank you, Demita.
Natasha Perez?
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hey, Tasha.
Hi. I guess my question is about, it was close to what Demita was asking, but I wanted to know, um, once I know we established what we want to do, but how soon are we looking at opening up the act? And then the next step, I guess, would be after that.
Okay. The way this works is that we have proposed language in a new bill, and we have that bill has been sponsored in both the House and the Senate. There'll be 3 committees of concern in either chamber. And so a total of 6 committees to evaluate, approve, or suggest changes or not hear the bill. And so when you say opening the statute, that is a sort of a technical term that they use, is that if the bill was passed through committees, the changes that we proposed are agreed upon, it's adopted by full or majority vote in the Senate and in the House, and then it's sent to the governor's desk for his signature, and he signs it. Then what would happen is the bill would go back in its final form to the legislative drafting office, and they would make the edits to 457 to reflect the proposed changes that were in the bill. And so the timeline for that would be between, let's say now, and the bill is, we met with the committee chairs already. They're asking questions and sharing the language to sort of get a consensus about where these concepts fit in terms of everybody on the committee, and they're in agreement that these changes are something that they can live with and agree with and vote for. But the whole process is probably a 90-day process from now for the 2024 session, and whatever portion of that in its final version, if it makes it through a House and Senate vote, usually it was June this past year. I think it's going to be a little bit earlier that the governor would be signing that. So between now and the mid-spring, end of spring.
Thank you, David.
And I guess let me just comment on that. As we get into committee weeks and the language is being heard, for people who are with us tonight and for the profession at large that want to, contact their local legislator, that want to provide supportive comments and input, FSOMA will provide you with some contact details and direction on that. But it's just a little early. The committees haven't heard. It's not scheduled to be heard yet. But, as that information is available to us, we'd share that with the association and profession.
Greta, I had your name, but I think you've said, do you need any more time?
I had asked to be put back on the list
to
talk about the doctoral part. So when you get to that, I'd like to ask a question.
Well, I've got you on, so.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I see the need for the doctoral training. All of the professions that have made it and have become nationally acclaimed, they also have a doctoral level, entry level into practice. My concern is that FSOMA is setting a deadline, 7 years, or even I heard you might go out to 10. What does the college, CCAHM, I'm not sure, what does the College of Acupuncture recommend to be the timeline? And I would respectfully request that FSOMA consider consulting with them on a correct timeline. I am concerned greatly that this is going to force out small acupuncture schools. As an educator who's had to change around because of doctoral level, I can tell you it takes more than 10 years to do something like this. And our small schools, our heritage, our tradition, they're not going to be able to do this in that kind of timeline. They need national support, and the CCAHM can give that to them. So I'd respectfully ask you.
No, of course, it's an excellent question. Let's start with the FSOMA's taken guidance from the ACHM, and we've had been in dialogue with the all 6 programs here in Florida. And there's the existing, well, let me start it another way. ACOM, ACA-CHM, they accredit 50 programs in the US. 21 of the 50 programs that they accredit have an entry-level doctoral program, or as we have in Florida, an advanced doctoral program. And so nearly half of the existing programs in the country have already adopted a doctoral standard. That's not the case here in Florida, but in almost every example of the programs that we've spoken to, they have done a gap analysis, they've done additional research, and they've been in touch with ACOM long before we brought this question up this year. ACOM started this conversation in 2013 nationwide with all of the college programs for a host of reasons that are, you know, maybe beyond what we need to discuss tonight, but they had their own reasons for going to the schools and saying, based on some criteria from the Department of Education, they wanted to take a look at what it would take to make the lift. The short version of that is, let me share a screen real quick.
Yeah, and just to answer two timeframes from our yesterday meeting with the schools, and you know, we're working to achieve some agreement on that. The target date have been 2040. So
yeah,
that gives a pretty good time for
repeat that.
colleges.
Could you repeat
that? The date would be 2040.
2040
so 16 years from today.
Right. So okay. In the discussion quickly, and I because there's other questions too, but Greta, is the existing Doctor of Acupuncture with Herbal Training program is 162 credits, about 16 credit hours in addition to what the master's program is, with a total hours of 27.
1965 said it's untrue.
Guys, and so the only thing I want to say is when I talked to ACOM about it, they said that most of the master's programs that now have doctoral programs realized that when they did a gap analysis, they already had sufficient hours for meeting the doctoral requirement. In other words, when I finished the program in Orlando 13 years ago, we finished with 3,400 plus hours. The DACM program only requires 2,755. Okay. And so what they're realizing is that a lot of what's packaged in that master's program exceeds what's required on the doctoral. And so what they needed to do was identify 5 competencies real quick. And the competencies need to be worked into their curriculum. They can do it at the end as a completion program as part of the master's, or they can feather it throughout the master's program. But it doesn't extend beyond what's already statutorily required for 4 years. And they're finding that, you know, it's a separate challenge for programs than it is for institutions, but a lot of the moving parts that they need for it are available to them already. And so it's a matter of just credentialing what they call their master's program into a dual master's doctoral program that includes the 16 additional credit hours, 240 class hours, an additional 130 clinic hours to meet that requirement. And that's relatively straightforward, notwithstanding maybe some faculty credentials that need to be elevated for teaching the doctoral level. And there's a handful of things that there's a checklist for them to do that, and they can work with ACOM to identify exactly what they need to do. But the conversation Galina was referring to, we met with the schools here in Florida again yesterday for lunch, and you know, there's large acceptance and agreement that when you look around at other healthcare professions that seek autonomy, that seek evaluation and management of patients, these other scope of practice aspects that we have for patient care that are unsupervised, that the doctoral training is really the proper threshold for entry level. So it's not a matter of if, but when. And certainly our goal is not to, create an unreasonable standard or to make things difficult from a admin standpoint or a financial standpoint for the schools. And so we have to find a way that, the timeline works for everybody involved. And Galina just said, the end of our conversation with them yesterday, we're looking at something around 2040 for an implementation date. And certainly, when I had my discussions earlier with the accreditors, they thought the timeline would be reasonably, could be done in a shorter time, but they don't have to do what the schools do. So we want to, partner with the schools on a timeline that makes sense for them. And my understanding about that quickly is that some of it has to do with faculty, making sure that you have the right personnel in place, and a natural, cycle for making sure that everybody's developed and the curriculum's developed in a way that not only meets the timeline, but it's done in a fairly organic and comprehensive and thorough way that meets the needs for the students and the school and the profession.
So your intention is not to sacrifice the small schools?
No. So this is, I'll come back to that. So the challenge with the small schools is that, if I understand what you mean by small, like I think the acupuncture and massage program in Miami, as well as East West College, is that they don't have institutional accrediting with ACOM. They have program credentialing only. And in order for them to convey a doctoral degree, they need to have both institutional and program accrediting. And so doing a site visit and getting the institutional accrediting taken care of, it's on its own timeline, and it's something that is achievable if they want to achieve that. And I think certainly we're giving, plenty of advance time to do that. But it's a slightly different road for those programs than it might be for Dragon Rise's 5-element FCIM, or even Adam for that matter, is because institutionally and programmatically, they have their accrediting done with ACOM already. And so the other two schools have to align their institutional accrediting so that they can convey that degree, or they'll develop some other strategy with the schools. It's hard for me to contemplate exactly how they do that, but it's not, we want to have a pause and a period that's sufficient for everybody, all of the schools, to be able to participate in doing this. There's not a strategy to eliminate or favor or do anything like this. It's just that we have to be realistic about what the standard is when we look around at other healthcare professions, and we also have to think about the rationale we're using when we try to establish things like titles and scope and privileges and things that we want to do without supervision. And so in order for me to have that conversation with legislators and regulators, we have to be able to point to some point on the horizon and say, our entry-level standards meet our non-physician colleagues. And so that we're not asking for things that are unreasonable in terms of autonomous practice.
Well, 2040 sounds a lot better than 2030.
Yeah.
If I may add 2 cents to that conversation, the proposed statutory changes do not mandate the school to matriculate the student with the doctorate degree. They impose the licensure requirement. How the schools are cooperating, like let's say I explored quite a few schools in California, okay? And students usually look closer to home because of the clinical hours. Those hours which are required to complete a first professional doctorate degree or the completion program, it's usually about 2 semesters, primarily online. So those can be completed at any Florida school and they can cooperate. So it's very similar. Like right now, acupuncture colleges provide dual bachelor and master's degree. In this particular case scenario, it can be dual master's and professional doctorate degree. It's not required anything extraordinary. It's in addition to existing program, which they may choose to do or may not choose to do, and just make an agreement between themselves that they will accept the credentials from other school. But why it is important on the back end for us as for profession, because we are here to protect the profession and advance the profession. We have too much education for being supervised, because in integrative settings or in hospitals, we work as allied personnel and we credentialed as allied personnel, which means I have to be supervised by physician. And we are looking to more employment for us, and there will be more employment for us. So do we want to do with master's degree and humongous debt to do a work of bachelor's degree? What's the point? Yeah. If we want to be unsupervised diagnosing provider, which we are moving toward as a profession on international and national level, we need that doctorate. That's where we are going. So, and how I said, we are targeting for ample time frames. It just because it's so cumbersome and so expensive to open that practice law. It's why we are raising that conversation now. And also we want to protect those of us who already have a doctorate degree. Remember last year conversation, they wanted to forbid the doctorate title for us. So that's the reasons. Thank you.
I want to just clarify and make sure people understand it's not a requirement for anyone who's licensed before the implementation date. PTs got a doctorate. None of the PTs had to get a doctorate to keep practicing. So right. It's not anything that affects anybody licensed now. It's for graduates after a certain date.
Right. Thank you.
All the way up, let's keep going.
Yeah, I say all the way up to that implementation point, all the way up until when it's effective. So, 2040. But it's just that you have to have that handoff at some point, and we need to be able to sort of support all the things that we want to codify in statute. You need to be able to point to someplace on the horizon where we say this is the stepping off point where, like Ellen was saying, PTs went to DPTs. And acupuncturists can do the same for their profession. Right now, PAs are looking at a doctoral program probably within the next 5 years. And the nurse practitioners, advanced nurse practitioners that practice with a master's now, they're looking at a 2025 initiative for nursing. And so when we look around, the landscape is like, we got to get on that elevator at some point, because to be able to hold down the things that we need to, and to secure the place that we want down the line.
I'm going to cut you off, David. I know, but we got a lot of people we got to get to. I have Reverend Dr. Lisa.
Yeah.
Hey, Lisa.
I just wanted to
there several times, but if you want to say.
Oh, I just wanted to say real quick, I was around when New York was transitioning to the doctorate, and there was a lot of fighting and stress about it. And what ended up happening was I didn't get my doctorate. I got out before that was required, but a lot of people in my class and people before me went back to get it later because it helped them get jobs in different places in academic areas and things like that. So and you guys have all been to the conferences where PCOM, which is where I went to school, has advertising, hey, come back and get your doctorate. So in 10 years or 15 years, maybe the schools will use that as an additional thing to market for people to go back and get that. Yeah. Looking down the line. I'm not saying I support this. I'm just saying that did happen in New York.
Okay, thank you. Angel Horner.
Yeah, I think most of what I was going to ask has already been addressed. I just, my main concern is the things that have no authority or protection. If we don't go in and change this, then it will affect us across the board. So we really do need to do this.
Thank you, Angel.
We had Ilyas Hamid asking about what would stop us from getting prescriptive authority with our intended changes. I think that's the point, but if, could you, Dr. Hamid,
the AMA.
Yeah, I mean, this is, there'll be additional scrutiny on this. And I think the point that Stuart made, can't be overstated, because when you're discussing legend drugs, it sort of opens up everything. And so it's incumbent on us to say, no, 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 we have a national standard. We have an established formulary that's common and usual to the practice of acupuncture and Eastern medicine. And these are the substances, these are the sterile solutions that we're seeking approval for use. And if it's on the list, we can use it. If it's not on the list, then maybe somebody needs to, work on a declaratory statement for something outside of that. But that's why we need to be as specific and narrow and evidence-based as we can when it comes to substantiating how and why it is that we want to use these things in practice, because the questions will come. And it can't just be because we want to. It has to be that it's tied to some clinical benefit that we can demonstrate.
Yeah. Ashley Seidel asks, if we do not have prescriptive rights for AIT, why is there a requirement? And I think that's because it's a protection issue. The board put it in a rule, which could be taken away in a flash and is very difficult to implement now without, if a pharmacist sees we have the right, a pharmacy company sees we have the right to use those substances, we can order them. But right now, I've had loads of calls over the years about people unable to.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, unfortunately, it's just a gray area of practice. And so it's since we have the opportunity to, pull it over the line and get the gray out, make it a very clear and understood and accepted area of practice. That's the goal.
There's a question about where in the bill does it say that current practitioners are grandfathered? And it's really not done to do that in bills.
The only thing I would say, Ellen, real quick on that is what the bill stipulates is it's going to say effective on a certain date. And this is in the qualifications for licensure portion of Chapter 457. And so if you're already licensed, you've already met the qualifications for licensure. So you can't be subjected to being requalified to do that. So under the qualifications for licensure, it's going to say effective, July 1st, 2040, or whatever that date might be. That means, all licensees who are applying or being awarded a license after that date need to meet the standard.
But it
doesn't have to be any more clear than that. Because there's no other legal interpretation or requirement created for somebody who is licensed prior to the effective date. You've already met the requirements for licensure, qualifications for licensure, qualifications for renewal. All of those things are unchanged. It only will affect prospective licensees after the effective date.
And if I may add, Christina Captain makes a very good example. It's very similar, like then Florida implemented requirement to pass all 4 NCCM exam as ground for licensure. Those of you who were licensed before that came effective, nobody touched you. Same if you after it.
No, that's an excellent example. Thanks, Dr. Captain.
Let's see, there are a couple of questions. ZZ Vintage is asking if there was a legal opinion about SB 230 last year from our attorneys, and I don't remember. I mean, I'm sure you consulted our attorneys, but
no, I did.
There's nothing legally.
Yeah, I mean, the way that rule was written last year, it pretty clearly stated 2 things. One is they had a list of terms that there was a prohibition on using the term physician was on that list. The term alone, in combination, or in connection with any other word or term to form a professional title. And the prohibition existed for anybody who did not have authority in their practice act to use that title already. So it was pretty clear in terms of what the impact of that, if it had passed, what it would have been. Now, I'll quickly state that that bill has been reintroduced this year, but it's been modified to remove the word physician. So they've reduced the total number of professional titles that are prohibited, and it's a much more succinct list that does not cross or impact with our profession. Physician is not on it.
Somebody is asking if the timing is so important, why do we have to raise the licensure? Is it just to doctoral? Is it the legislators asking for this, or a thing only FSOMA wants? And I would say, from the phone calls and the reactions last year from both FSOMA members and non-members, people valued acupuncture physician as a title. It wasn't just FSOMA. And FSOMA looked at ways to protect that. Right. And yes, the legislators said that was the way to do it, was to put it in our statute to protect that title. And that the doctoral supports having that title. If we don't have the doctoral, you can't support having that title. So
I think that's part of it. And the other thing is what we're talking about, the practical component of unsupervised practice. You know, if you want to have that level of autonomy, you have to look at, you know, what other non-physician peers do we have that have similar autonomy in their practice, and they all practice with an entry-level doctorate. It just doesn't exist otherwise. And so the challenge for us as a profession is it has to be there has to be a certain rationale to what we're doing. You can't ask for areas of scope and areas of practice and not have academic knowledge, skills, ability, training, and degree to support that. It just, you know, and hopefully as we move forward with the timeline, they're willing to grant us areas of scope and title and all the prescriptive authority, things that we're asking for, with a promise date, you know, for 2040 to bring up the entry level minimum standard. You know, I think, you know, it's an effort. You know, well, this is the challenge. We'll continue to work on it.
I'm going to combine a few questions, and if somebody that it's their question and I'm not doing it right, please unmute and speak. But Danielle and then Beth Cole ask, Danielle wants to know about nutritional advice and supplements and where that fits in. And then homeopathics is in our bill now, and I believe it remains. I don't think you think you've changed that, but nope. Somebody's asking about homeopathics, if it includes homeopathics.
You're talking about like oral homeopathics or injectables?
I believe she's talking about homeopathic medicine. I think you could talk about the problem with
oral
topicals,
things like this. Yeah. That's in our practice, and
not changing. Yeah,
that's not being changed. And the question about nutritional guidance, and you know, we've expanded that to include botanical medicine, herbal medicine, and nutritional supplements is covered under the scope of practice. And it's also it's in the scope, but it's also existing in rule as well. But we want to provide authority and protection for it in statute. And from a regulatory standpoint, the oral and the topical from homeopathic medicine is done under DSHEA and under the Food and Cosmetic Act. So it's an area that's open to us from practice, because it's not a regulated area of practice in general.
There are other things in the chat I'm skipping over a little bit. Lincoln Zhao from FCIM wants to be clear that they oppose the doctorate intro-level proposal. We have thought about what the impact on students, and it would probably cost a little more to go through the program, but they would have a degree that has a much better chance of getting a job than they do now. The dropout rate, you know, when I started being executive director, we had 2,600 active licensed acupuncturists, and now it's somewhere around 2,730. In 6 years, we've only had 130 net add of active licensed in the state. That doesn't compute. So, you know, we're not getting out there and keeping in practice. FSOMA puts out business classes. We put out classes to help people with getting in the medical system. You know, we did not lead the charge into Western medicine. Other people in the profession have done that. They did studies in the ER, et cetera. But we are supporting people that want that. We are supporting as much as we can people that want to have their own business and be successful, because that's what it takes to have your own private practice, is to have a sense of business and be able to do it. So that's what some of this is about.
I think, Galena touched on it earlier. It's really the area of expansion and opportunity with our medicine is going to be via employment. And the employment is going to come from, facilities, health systems, and interdisciplinary teams. And so it's an area of education that we can only benefit from having a little bit more of that. And being able to exist and work and have, respect and equality in the workplace, both from, financial opportunity as well as, from a clinical standpoint. So I think it's just the challenge is when we, like I said, look around, you have to sort of move with the tide and find a way that hopefully everybody feels like there's value to that. We do want all the stakeholders to be part of that process and decision making and timeline, but ultimately,
if I may add to this statement a little bit more, it's not only our desires as a profession. There also is a great pressure from the government about gainful employment. Ellen mentioned we have a very significant drop from the profession. I can signify in my college, then I entered East-West College of Natural Medicine in Sarasota. In my class was 26 people, graduated 11. Today, I believe only 3 of us in practice, and I graduated in 2008. So what that means, loans are not repaid. Department of Education is starting to check on that. Why acupuncture profession has such a low rate of loan repayment. And our schools are really in big danger, because if there is no gainful employment and we cannot prove that gainful employment and people repaying loans, schools going to close because they will withdraw the loans, educational loans for our schools. So it's actually to benefit of our schools, because with increasing the standards of education, we are capable to achieve the higher standards across the profession, the better employment, the better pay at the employment. So we can repay student loans, we can preserve our colleges. David, if you can show that slide of enrollment in the colleges, and it's not because colleges teach bad. No, our colleges are good, but they don't provide enough knowledge to work in the hospital. And you see how enrollment in the schools dropped. It's a big problem. We need employment. So that's
okay, Dr. I'm sorry, Lincoln is here. I thought he had left, but if he wants to speak, he's been in the chat saying things. You're welcome to unmute and speak.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ellen. I appreciate you calling me out for the comments. I've been just trying to give the schools input so that everybody can see it, because I'm not here to engage in any debate with David or with anyone from FSOMA, because I applaud your efforts to improve the profession. We're all aligned in the sense that we want to be more recognized. We want to do everything we can to make lives better for everyone who's in this field of practice. What we do differ on with the current proposal is basically how we go about doing that. Now, what David has proposed in his presentation about expanding the scope of practice to include more specifics as far as what the doctors are already doing in their daily practice. We're fully in support of it. I think that's absolutely great. If we can get that passed, that's great for everyone. What we do differ on is how and when. Is the so-called doctoral requirement for licensure. Now, I've heard a lot of, I've heard from Galina, I've heard from someone else as well on, how the schools should not really worry about the change in the professional qualification requirement. And we cannot differ, like we cannot disagree more, because at the end of the day, if our schools do not offer the doctoral program, and none of us do, no school, none of the 6 schools in Florida currently offers an entry-level doctoral program. And I want to be very clear, the entry-level doctoral program that we're referring to is not the same as the DAOM program. And even the DAOM program is only found at, I think, Atlantic. So none of the 6 schools has an entry-level doctoral program. So now for us to ramp up this program, which I can safely speak on behalf of all 6 schools, we're all committed to doing that. But it has to be done at a time that makes sense for us. Adding a program at an institution of higher learning takes years, okay? You have to hire new teachers because it's a doctoral program. We cannot hire master's degree holders to teach classes, right? We have to get it accredited. And that means at least a 2-year lead time before ACOM will even look at our program. And then there's no guarantee that we will get accredited on the very first try. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years. Sometimes it's 3 to 5 years. And then you won't have students graduating from this program 4 years until 4 years later. So already that's adding up to 10, 12 years, even in the best case scenario. And yet when FSOMA came to us, they were going to do this right away. They never consulted us. No one has even raised this question to us. What do you think is a good idea? No one has ever bothered placing a phone call, an email. All they did is put into presentation in the PowerPoint presentation and just gloss over it as if we're not going to catch it. I'm personally, you can scoff all you want, David.
No,
but
no, no, no. I welcome the input.
We were not.
We've
not impressed in the way this issue was presented to us.
Right. We've had several opportunities to work with all of the schools in the development.
I would rather not have.
Guys, I don't want to get into a debate. Ellen asked me to speak, so I'm going to speak. Yeah. I don't want to debate anybody.
Well, I asked people not to do attacking, and
So we are at a point where we want to support FSOMA. Okay, but we also have to think about our students. We have to think about our employees. Don't forget, many acupuncturists teach at these 6 schools. And if these 6 schools go out of business, they lose a significant portion of their employment. You lose basically the most important engine through which new talent enters the AP field in Florida. And we have made this point time and again during our multiple calls with FSOMA. To truly make this industry stronger, to have a stronger voice, you need more acupuncturists, not fewer. By raising the professional qualifications without an ample ramp-up time, you risk, and not just risk, you're basically guaranteeing the demise of all 6 schools in Florida, which cuts off the flow of blood entering the field. You make even out-of-staters who want to move to Florida to practice acupuncture less likely to do so. Okay, these are practical considerations we as schools are very concerned about. And I'm sure I'm not the only person on this call who is thinking about these things. So I'm asking FSOMA to go back to the drawing table, think of a more palatable plan that takes care of the interests of all stakeholders. Because from the sound of it, it's only the currently licensed acupuncturists who are going to benefit from this. Because you know what? You guys are grandfathered, right? No one on this call from the FSOMA side has a doctoral degree. And yet you're raising the bar for future entrants into the profession. Now, I'm not saying that you guys are motivated by self-interest, but there's a little bit of self-interest in there. So I'm almost done.
And you're being insulting. You do not need to be insulting when you're making your points. You've made some good points.
Well,
you're questioning people's integrity, and I do not like that.
We have no reason to see it otherwise. States are doing that. Because no other state is doing it. You guys, you're the only people pushing for this. It's not the people on this call. The people on this call are only hoping that we can get the specifics of practice into the act. No one else on this call is asking for the professional qualification to be raised. No one, except for David and Galena, and maybe you, Ellen. You're the only three people on this call who are asking for to raise this professional licensure requirement.
I'm going to stop you now. Thank you very much. There have been some people supporting that. We'll take a poll, but I think that's enough. You know, questioning integrity is not it's not allowed.
Thank you, Dr. Lincoln, very much for your opinion. But after the conversation with the schools, and you all said that you are looking to the doctorate, that you are prepared to take steps, and we listened to you, and we definitely adjusted the time frames. Yeah. If an initial was in 2030s, now after listening to you, and we understand completely and agree with you, we are proposing 2040. You said it will take 10 to 12 years. Proposal is 16 years. I think that it's fairly good compromise. And thank you so much for your input, but we have to worry about future survival of the profession. Who's next to speak? I have seen a lot of comments from Christina Captain on the chat, Dr. Captain, and next one would be Hong Jang He, also expressed a strong desire to speak.
Hey, Galena, this is Ivo from Tampa. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ivo.
Hey, I'm not sure which school this was from, but I was one of the students recently that graduated, and I was begging, hoping, praying that the school in Sarasota end up with doctoral program, so I don't have to go to another state to obtain waste time and money when, you know, something like this would have fit beautifully in the state of Florida. Currently, the Florida state is losing a lot of business simply because graduates are going to California to obtain their doctoral programs. I'm not sure why this particular teacher or director of a school is thinking that students are now looking to get their doctoral program.
Ivo, thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
as they say, Dr. Captain.
Yeah. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say. I think Dr. He wants to speak. I've said everything in the chat. I just find it. I'm just amazed at the lack of foresight by any school that would want to oppose 16 years in the future having a doctorate. If they don't have that much foresight, they will all fail completely, especially when the naturopaths get licensure, which they're up for this year as well.
Dr. He, please.
This is Hong Jian. Did some mention my name as well?
Thank you, Hong Jian.
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
We thought you wanted to speak. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to speak and then somebody else speak, so I let them speak. And yes, I've been in Florida since the 80s. So I went through many of legislation and practice and growth. I have to say, if it's that we have to be realistic and try to just to protect our scope, it's not going to work because everybody protect the scope is losing the battle. So we need to advance ourselves. And naturopath, and they have a bill this year, and they had a bill before. We fight it and we killed it before. Now they're coming back, and then if they pass it, which is one of the days well, and what do you think the acupuncturists, they're in their practice, they can do acupuncture as well. Okay, they don't say acupuncture, they say dry needling, and many professions, the nurse practitioners and nurse, physician assistants, they all wanted to do the dry needle, and they are, so once they doing that, why you think the acupuncturists will be going to study and to get the master's degree, and you may not have any school at all. So I really hope, you can open eyes and realistically to see. And currently, you have a bigger growth in our profession, or you are actually not growing. And once the naturopath pass the law and they have in the scope of practice and they have a school, and so you may have no students. So I just want you seriously think about that.
Thank you, Dr. Hope.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, and I think I want to take 1 second to just circle back. I've been very grateful to the willingness of the schools, and including Lincoln. We've met a couple of times as a group, and I invite to maybe do that individually as well, to say that we're in it together. It's a relatively small profession, and we depend on our educators. We depend on new talent and people coming into the profession. But the only way that we're going to continue to do that is if there's a positive outlook for employment, and that they see that their investment for their program is going to translate into a job in healthcare. And so schools are important. The professional association and trying to help with professional development is important. The protection and advancement of scope, all of these things to keep pace with what's an expected norm in healthcare. The challenge is, like I say, we don't want to have scope taken away. We don't want to be put into a situation where we need to be supervised, whether it's in a facility or anywhere else. We want to have the most positive income potential and portability of our license. And so advancing the training standards go with that. And I'm extremely confident that there's a common place for a timeline and a strategy for Florida that works. And again, the discussion for us in terms of why now is because it's been 25 years. Hopefully we don't have to go through a project like this again for 25 years. And we're trying to use the opportunity and the momentum and the willingness and the support we have to make sure that the things that are most critical to professional practice are incorporated into our scope now, and that we don't leave any loose ends out. And we don't want to, be vulnerable to being picked apart by other professions. But in order to do that, we need to have domain and dominion and control over our own medicine and be able to, and you're only going to achieve that with doctoral degree. And that's why these, like I say, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and these pieces all fit together. And we start pulling the pieces apart, then the rationale gets a little loose. It's hard for me to go back to the things in area of scope and say, yes, we can, provide unsupervised injections in statute. We're taking it out of the gray area of practice and putting it in statute for all to see. So, but we need to be able to have autonomous practice to do that. And so, like I say, these pieces all fit together like a puzzle. And if we start pulling it apart, it gets very difficult to be able to hold that together. That's my comment. If there's more input, let's take that.
Before we move to other questions, let me to clarify a little bit the confusion which I see in the chat about the degrees which we have in the profession. Entry-level, so-called first professional doctorate, that's what we are talking about. Our ATAM, Atlantic Institute in Fort Lauderdale, offers a doctorate in Oriental Medicine, which is an advanced degree, 2 years degree. We are not talking about advanced degrees. We are talking entry level. The difference between Masters of Science, which we all have now, and first professional doctorate is about 3 semesters. The difference in knowledge is how to work in the system, how properly do records, how to communicate in the integrative healthcare system, and a little bit more of the knowledge on HIPAA, on documentation, on rights, on rules, on regulation.
And evidence-based practice in our own medicine too.
Exactly, how to practice. It does not provide you more knowledge on traditional medicine per se. It just prepares you to practice at the same level as other independent healthcare providers. Because right now, I'm sorry, we're all negligent in our practice, okay? That's the competencies, and it's just 3 semesters. It's not 2 years. Please don't confuse those two. And half of the colleges in the United States already offer that first professional doctorate. And schools should not cry, because let's say, I'm looking to complete, I don't have a doctorate either. I'm looking to complete so-called completion track, or you heard it as being a bridge program, which is those 3 semesters or 9 months online, which is about what Pacific offers it for $9,000. So it's actually additional stream of revenue for our schools. They can offer for all of us, yes? What we have about 1/3 of people in the state who have a doctorate, 2/3 are actually potential revenue streams for our Florida schools, okay? And it benefits all of us. And plus, exactly like Christina said about foresight, you know, any parent has a responsibility to ensure skill and survival for kids. Our students are our kids. I'm on my exit. I don't care which will be in 15 years. In 15 years, I will be retired and hell with all that. But I want all of those who come behind of us to preserve the medicine, to practice independently. Don't be squished, just put the needle in here, and that's it. And I can tell you, as an employee of the hospital, and I used to look at the employment of acupuncturists in the hospital, and I participated as a member of Hospital Task Force Committee in developing accreditation guidelines for the work in the hospital. Currently, hospitals are looking at your resume. Oh, doctorate, it's not required, no, but they will pick the doctorate degree before the master's, just because that first professional doctorate teaches you how to work in the hospital, how to do your practice legally, correctly, and avoid the lawsuits. Okay, so that's all what I wanted to say. Thank you. Who is next in line to ask questions?
I think there have been chats going on, but not, and the titles are going to be identified as entry level and advanced level to our medical system. I think they'll be able to tell whether you have a, because you give them your resume. So, but it's not going to be necessarily something they look at. Unless it's a really like a high level supervisory position. I don't see, if somebody wants to unmute themselves, if you have a burning question we haven't answered, we've gotten, I mean, it's a long program. So I want to thank everybody for being here and for being passionate about our profession. And I know, for me, I love Oriental medicine, and I want to see it be used by every Floridian for their health. I had a little hand in the mission statement we have right now. And I think having what I see is, again, if you're good at business, you can have a successful practice. if you don't have an interest or a passion for business, you kind of need a job. I was lucky and often had a job because I have learned a lot about business in 20 years, but starting out, I had no desire to have a business. So having that, and when I've gone to schools and talked to students, they raise their hand. Most of them raise their hand wanting a job, hoping they'll get a job. So I feel like this is important for the future. And one thing people ask about, I'm just going to say this briefly about the national. We have some people going to the ASA. They're having a fly-in. We believe that Medicare and being included in Medicare, whether you want to utilize it and bill it in your practice or not, is really essential, because if people do see the value of acupuncture, if we're not in the system able to bill for it, if people can't come to us and have their insurance pay for it, they're going to go to somebody else. And there are people that, PTs, nurses, you can name almost any other medical profession, they'll jump into the breach. And we won't be able to be there because we're not, in Medicare as a provider. And so it's important. That's an important campaign. And I hope people will support that. Okay.
Yes, and to reiterate, just a lot of confusion about Medicare as well. It does not matter how much Medicare pays, because you are not obligated to accept 100% Medicare patients in your practice. You can accept 10 or you can accept 0. But what it really means, like let's say employment. At the current moment, any acupuncturist who works at the hospital primarily works in outpatient setting. Those few which are lucky to work inpatient are working on the grants. Why? Because if the service and provider cannot be reimbursed by Medicare, hospital inpatient cannot offer that service provided by that provider. That is vital for us to achieve inclusion of acupuncturists as a Medicare providers. It's not about money, it's about jobs. And the moment Medicare pays for us, includes us, every insurance will pay for us. You don't want to take insurance? You don't have to. Will economic situation to get much better anytime soon? Probably not. So our population base with the cash money is fading away. The economic situation will make us to take insurance, and we rather take it on our terms. For that, we need a scope of practice and protect that. And by the way, if you would like to participate in efforts of our insurance committee, because right now we are trying to fight for our right to get paid, please join our commissions. FSOMA needs volunteers. Please go to FSOMA website.
Committees.
Please open FSOMA emails. Please participate in social media. We are not here for us. If you think that I'm eager to spend 20 hours a week for free for FSOMA, I'm not. But somebody has to protect us. And David probably spends 40 or 60. I'm praying for his health, because that deal with law has been extensive. So please.
But Galina makes a good point. And I'll just make a quick recap on this. When it comes to questions about like Medicare and insurance and stuff, this is really, it may be part of somebody's private practice at some point, but it's about the gainful employment component of this. If an outpatient facility, for example, has, employment opportunity for an acupuncturist, they're only going to hire them if they have a clear way to monetize their time. And if they can't bill insurance and Medicare, like in an outpatient facility for acupuncture services, they're going to give it to another provider who they can. And so it could be anybody from a PT, chiropractor, or some nurse, other type of therapist, athletic trainer, somebody who meets that criteria. And so it's really about, think about the 70% of people that were in your graduating class that are not in practice. But if they could open the newspaper and see that East Broward County Hospital outpatient or some large physical therapy or pain management group was hiring integrative practitioners and they wanted to have an acupuncturist on staff, they could afford to pay that person because they know that they're going to be able to bill for their time. And, you know, when we are carved out of that system and that opportunity, then everybody has to, you know, hang their own shingle. It's, you know, maybe 1 to 3% of the profession. I think I saw in NCCOM did a professional survey a few years ago. It was like less than 4% of the profession that's employed in a hospital, which means 96% of us are hanging a shingle. And so in order to have gainful employment, we just need to kind of tilt that scale a little bit. It doesn't have to be that everybody's going to get a job and there's nowhere for the private practitioner. It's the same thing we see in medicine and other aspects of care. There's people in primary care, and then there are, you know, hospitalists and internists and people that work in facilities and systems. We just want to create opportunities for people to be able to pick and choose their career path. And if we don't have the academic degree, we don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to work in those institutional settings or even outpatient clinic settings, it's a real challenge. And it's a little bit of a black eye to the profession. We need to be trained, you know, better to do that, to give everybody the opportunity.
Okay, and if I can read one of the statements from Yinan Perez, I work for a medical corporation. They offer acupuncture. They don't know about our scope of practice, less about titles. That's exactly why we need to open our statutes and clearly describe the scope of practice, clearly describe our education, clearly describe our titles, for everybody would know. And that will actually help us, this compact licensure, because every state now has something very, very different. And 3 states in the United States don't license acupuncturists whatsoever. California is fighting over accept NCCOM as a standard or not. Until we unite, we are in problem, yes? And we are actually in conversation with NCCOM. What is that perfect practice act, which actually will propel our profession forward on the entire United States level? Right. And one of the reasons why acupuncture, Florida is first, thanks to you, because we are the strongest association in the entire United States. ASA doesn't have a capacity right now to move anything forward. ASA is barely trying to keep up with putting us to Medicare Act. Thanks to them very much, because that is a federal association, has to work on the federal level. But we are the flagmans in our profession to show that scope of practice, to show there is the place of the profession. Somebody has to move forward. Yeah. Arizona, just very recently, it was one of the poorest scope of practices in the country. Yes, acupuncture only. Now look at Arizona. They just passed their law, I believe last year. Or
it was brilliant. We looked
now
closely at Arizona.
Best practice laws.
Yeah.
We're taking them as a model for some of our corrections.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons we want our place in medicine carved. We don't want to be in massage parlor. And the conversation right now is we need to pedal to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.
No, that was a huge, wonderful contribution from everybody. And, you know, the discussion with the programs, the colleges is ongoing. We have more meetings with them. And I think that, you know, stakeholders, you know, we have to find a way that everybody is able to sort of, you know, have their own vision seen and understood, and they're able to realize that. And we're not trying to, you know, be overly heavy-handed in this. It's their job to do, and you know, we certainly want to let them do that. And I welcome the input from Mr. Zhao from FCIM, and and it may not feel that way, we're sort of at odds, but we need every stakeholder to feel valued, to feel understood, to feel appreciated, but we also need them to contribute and find a way to get on the rope so we can pull in the same direction. And I remain hopeful that that's possible.
And to conclude the meeting today, we will try to keep you guys updated with what is happening at the legislative arena. We are very, very on tight frames. We were able to obtain our House sponsor watch just about a week ago. So things are happening sometimes so fast, so tight. We literally to the week ago didn't know that our proposed language going to go anywhere or it will be stalled. We understand the frustration of Dr. Zhao and the schools and everything else, but sometimes there is just not enough time to bring every stakeholder on board. And sometimes David receives the news from our lobbyist, Corinne, at 10 p.m. in the evening, and we are at 11 at the conversation, responding really fast because there is a harassment to the profession or something like that. So please roll with us, please support us, please encourage those who do not participate in the FSOMA, join the FSOMA, because, unfortunately, money is a grease. And if you don't grease the courage, you don't move anywhere. You all are precious, and we are really, really, really just passionate about protection and about profession and protecting of the profession. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Galina.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you so much. Have a great day tomorrow.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.